Welcome back to the Demand Drivers podcast. So, we did our previous episode on segmentation and target marketing, and it generated a lot of discussion behind the scenes. So we're back again because we want to discuss this further, and I think that a lot of our audiences will benefit from this too. So we have our guest panelist here, Dr. Leanne. So let's jump in. Right, so what were we discussing? Mike,
I think you're taking it away again because it was target market versus personas.
Exactly. I think that's where it's one of those things that I think often gets sort of interchangeably used, and that creates a lot of confusion. Where people sort of talk about a target market or they talk about a persona. And often when we start talking personas, and we kind of went through that in the previous podcast, you get very narrow and very, very specific there. And that often gets people confused because you're talking about a target market and then you're going really specific like that. And it's like, well, hang on. So am I talking about who my customer is? Am I talking to, do I have to get really specific, or can I keep it a bit more broad? Like, where do I go to? So I think it's the key thing is for us to kind of have that conversation here to sort of clarify that. The way we look at it is that you have your target market. That's sort of a broad group, and you can have multiple target markets, but they're a broad sort of section of potential customers. Yep. And then within that, you have specific personas that they're the personification of a particular type of person that you can talk to. Because if you start talking about target markets, it gets difficult when you're trying to create your message and your identity, because you're talking to this group of people, and it's
bunch of stats, right?
And that gets hard to sort of really be clear on. Whereas when you start looking at persona, you are talking to an individual. Yep. And there's a really articulated individual that you can then work and craft your messaging as though you're talking specifically to that person. So it makes it a lot easier in the creative sense to be able to create messages that resonate with that particular person. That's a lot easier than talking to a group of people that you sort of...
So you're basically, you take your target market and you segment that into personas. Yes, and we usually use avatars to describe different personas, and the avatars. The avatars.
I'm vegetarian.
Yeah.
That's
The avatars have the different types of characteristics, like we talked about in the last podcast, and that's how we break them down. But what we do in branding is take it another step further, and then we say, actually, our brand's got a persona as well. And then we've got to make sure that our brand talks to each one of the audience personas, so that you've got to ensure that you're actually being able to communicate with each one. So just to add that extra layer of complexity. But for the audience that we've got today, focus on your target market, then break that down into different personas.
Nice.
And maybe you want to talk about, again, some of the ways that you categorise different avatars?
ways that we do that, avatars, personas, same sort of thing. We use personalities. So the best way really that we've found in the sales psychology space is looking at the 4 quadrants of personalities. We quite often will use the DISC profile. So dominant, influence, steady and compliance, because within that we can easily teach it and easily show people how to communicate and what's the best communication medium for each of those. But as you were saying, within your target market, you then have each of those different personalities that we need to position and message to. And in sales, the marketing and sales message is so important that it resonates within the target market, but with the person, which, Mike, you were saying, it's with a person. The other thing that I work with is the pyramid of priorities. It's something that I've created where we look at a pyramid and we break it into 4 tiers. And your target market is actually the top, very top of the peak of the pyramid, which is your niche, which is your absolute expertise and the type of client that understands you and you understand them. Absolutely your number one. But then we broaden the spectrum a little bit more into Tier 2, Tier 3 and Tier 4, which is the base, because that target has potentially more business because it's wider. Having said that, though, you need to be able to pick the people that are for you within that target, and by doing that, you use your personas.
Right, okay. So so are you saying that you target up here, but then you're quite happy to have business in the other layers?
Correct. So there's a base.
And then as you grow, does your target market, do the base layers then gravitate up?
No.
they just stay?
They always stay. So the example I quite often use is with a sand pit. So we have a sand pit, and I have my ideal client that is building a sandcastle with me with a bucket and spade in the sandpit, and that's the top of the pyramid. We then have someone that might be walking inside the sandpit but on the edge. They're also got a problem that I can solve, but they're not on the top of the pyramid. Then we have the next layer, which is someone that's sitting on the edge. They're neither in the sandpit or out of the sandpit. They also have a problem that we can solve, but again, not ideal in the target, but we can help them. And then we have the people walking all the way around the sandpit, and that's the fourth tier. There's a lot more people walking around. There's a lot more potential business. It's broader. They also have a problem that we can solve. And within each of those tiers, we then identify the 4 personalities that we target.
Broader than, yeah, well, that's, yeah, that's no, that's good. No, it's not bamboozling.
Yeah.
It's probably broader than we would go, because we would tend to focus a lot on their what's the unique value prop. Well, I don't like the term unique. I think it oversells things. I think, you know, what is that's your true value proposition that allows you to differentiate yourself from other competitors in your market, and we tend to focus on that and then orientate that to what we would call the target market.
Yeah, sure.
Now, it's a little bit vague as to whether what we're discussing, what we're viewing in from a branding perspective would cover all of your pyramid, or whether we'd just be at the top. I think we would probably touch on all of it, but then when we get into the nitty-gritty of going down to where do I drive my marketing resource and where do I drive my dollar, if you like, I focus really narrow into, okay, what are the specific personas I want to address and which one's the most lucrative for me, and then I'll provide my marketing to that, and that's would be complemented by messaging.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. So I'd probably spend very little time and effort on the people wandering around the sandpit because they're probably parents, you know?
God.
This analogy is going to go off on a bit.
As I always say, that if you're not targeting the people that are walking around the sandpit and you've got a service or a product or something that you can solve and you can help them, if they're not your client, they're someone else's.
They're someone else's, but are they the ones where you're going to get the most response from your marketing investment? If you've got limited resources, because if they are, then shouldn't they be in the top pyramid?
No, because they're in an industry, let's say it's very diverse, it's an industry that you may not work with often, or you may not have thought could bring in business. But all of a sudden, there is someone that really wants to work with you and is actually willing to spend a lot of dollars. And had you not looked beyond your sandcastle, you wouldn't have even tapped into that market.
Okay.
It's an interesting one, because
it's quite interesting, because I think it's really interesting in the way that you... I think it's really interesting in the way that you message and the way that you reach people through your different, whether it be ads or whether it be organic, in the way that you reach different networks and then different people who are who sponsor your brand and who reinforce your brand, basically. So, because they're not necessarily who you would go out to initially target, but it's being aware that you could strike more gold further over.
That's where we sort of look at it from what we call a total addressable market.
Yeah.
So they're all the people that could potentially have you as a solution. They may not be who you're focused on, but it doesn't mean you can't still serve them. It's just not your core focus. So you say that's the total addressable market. And then within that, we then have target markets that we really want to kind of go after. That's the ones that we sort of see as our ideal clients. But you still have that whole market. It doesn't mean you can't still serve them.
Yeah, look, I think that's really good conversation, but somebody who's been really quiet this time.
Yeah, I know, right? It never happens.
Yeah,
Okay.
It never happens. So, Chris, come on.
Yeah, look, I think
jump into this.
I think as a summary for everyone listening, I think the best way to think of it is that we've got Mike coming from the overarching marketing strategy, who looks at those concentric circles, as in, like, you've got your total addressable market, and then you've got your target segments, and then you've got your avatars or personas inside. And then you've got Leanne, who's coming from a sales perspective, which, as the sandpit and the triangle, we're looking at more of a influencer, kind of, not in the more traditional sense, not the new influencer sense, where you've got like an influence message and you've got an influence target. And then Chris and I come from more the execution phase, where it's more like, right, we've identified strategy, sales, and now we're looking at how we execute a brand. And I think that that's what we're looking at. So the main takeaways, I would say, look, the way I would say it is that it's important to look at these elements when you're targeting your brand, and to get the most demand and to drive the most demand to all of your websites and content and marketing is to make sure that you define that customer, look at those segments, build your avatars, look at your sales funnel, and go from there. I think that's the best way to then make it all fit together. So hopefully we haven't lost anyone here and we pulled it all together. I think that's the best way. So everyone...
Yeah, great. Great summary.
So thank you for listening to the Demand Drivers podcast, and we can't wait to see you in the next episode.
Cheers. Thank you.